Hope you had a great first week in our Love Wins Life Group study. Last week, I shared the story of when I first proposed to Shammy almost 25 years ago. What many people don't know is the proposal almost didn't happen that night. That's right, I almost missed my moment to get my bride to say yes to being my bride on the night I had planned. Now, it wasn't because I was feeling the nerves, getting second thoughts, or doubting the plan I had. It was because I almost didn't have the ring Shammy had selected. Here's what happened. Earlier that day, I went to the jeweler's to pick up the engagement ring. When I arrived, the clerk went in the back to bring it out to me. Now, I don't know how large of a back room a jewelry store has, but it was odd that it was taking so long to find a ring I had already paid for. And as I waited, I decided to look at the other wedding rings they had on display. And as I surveyed the selection they had out on display case, one of the rings caught my attention. This ring looked so similar to the one I was there to pick up for Shammy. Now, I thought that was a little odd, but I figured they had more than one ring of each type, and I just kept on looking. Now, after way too long of a wait, the clerk finally came over to me and told me they couldn't find my ring. What? So many questions went racing through my mind. How could you lose my ring? Why didn't you just let me know sooner? What was I going to do about that night? Then I remembered the ring I saw out on display. I took the clerk over to it, and when I pointed it out, they realized it was Shammy's ring. They were so embarrassed to tell me they had accidentally put the ring back out on display after they had sized it for Shammy's finger, instead of putting it back on hold. I was just glad to have her ring and keep my plans intact to ask Shammy that night to be my bride. But the clerk had other plans. To compensate me for the mistake and embarrassment, they reimbursed me a percentage of the ring's cost. And they gave me some gourmet chocolates, wine glasses, and some sparkling cider so I could celebrate with my bride-to-be, pending a yes from Shammy, of course. And just like Shammy's ring was lost, there's something else that has been lost when it comes to being sure love wins in our lives. It's the lost art of loving yourself. Specifically, being able to love yourself with the value God wants you to love yourself with. Why does this matter? Well, for love to really win in your life and in this world, we have to discover, or perhaps rediscover, how God wants each of us to love ourselves with great value. You see, you can't love others with great value if you can't love yourself first that same way. And you can't love God with great value if you can't love others with great value because you're not loving yourself with great value. This art of loving yourself has been lost by so many. We get into relationships trying to find love when we must find love for ourselves first before we are in relationships. The crazy thing is this lost art of love isn't really lost. Like Shammy's ring, it's just misplaced. This kind of love is always on display, and each one of us have recognized it many times before. It's displayed in the Old Testament and the New Testament of the Bible. It is recorded in 3 of the 4 gospel stories of Jesus. At least 6 different writers in the books of the Bible found it important enough to include in their writings. And what is it then? It's love your neighbor as yourself. Really, that's it? Yeah, that's it. This simple 5-word sentence carries with it so much power to see love win in your life. Just look how valuable the Apostle Paul thought it was. He says this, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, 'You shall love your neighbor as yourself.'" And then Paul also says, "For this you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, 'You shall love your neighbor as yourself.'" Loving your neighbor as yourself was considered a big deal to Paul. It was even bigger to Jesus. Jesus said this when it comes to loving your neighbor as yourself. He said it was a commandment in Mark chapter 12, verses 29 through 31. Love your neighbor as you love yourself is not a suggestion from Jesus. It is a command. Jesus isn't thinking, man, I hope they follow this thought I have. No, Jesus is thinking, I expect them to choose to love like this and live this way. Then Jesus takes it up another notch when Jesus said that this was the second greatest commandment. I mean, there are over 600 commandments in the Bible, and sure, some of them don't seem to be as big of a deal, but there are some good commandments out there, like honoring your parents, honoring your oaths and your vows, giving to the poor, having all debts canceled every 7th year, hello, and having no child sacrifices. And of course, don't eat unclean insects. I can't think of an insect I would ever consider clean anyways. But to Jesus, there was not one other command that would top loving your neighbor at the level you love yourself, except only to love God at the highest level. But Jesus wasn't done there, though. Not only was loving your neighbor as you love yourself a commandment, second only to loving God, but Jesus said this was equally important as the most important commandment of loving God with all we had. Do you realize what that means? It means that loving God with all you have equals loving your neighbor as yourself. And that's huge. And yet we spend far more time focused on loving God and loving others that we lose sight of what is the true catalyst to that love even happening. And that is loving yourself first. I think the reason why we lose sight of loving ourselves first is because we know we have the tendency to be selfish. So when we choose to say yes to Jesus and his proposal, we think we have to stop loving us and start loving him and others first. But that's just not true. If we don't love ourselves first, we will never be able to love others at the level Jesus wants us to love them, and in turn, never be able to love God at the level he wants us to love him. One of the simplest ways to start loving yourself with great value so you can love others and God with great value is learning to say 2 phrases: yes and thank you. I used to have the hardest time receiving something from someone who offered to give me a gift, a helping hand or assistance in some way, until one day while I was in a meeting with some pastor friends of mine in Sacramento, California. One of them told me this: when I refuse people's help, I'm actually robbing them of a blessing God wants them to give me and wants them to receive. By refusing those around me, I was robbing them and me of blessings. This was so eye-opening to me, and I hope for you too. My friend continued and said, just learn to say yes and thank you to those who offer to bless me in the way they choose. From that day on, I have had no problem receiving something from others because I realize I'm allowing God to bless them when they bless me. I'm valuing not just myself, but valuing others who are blessing me too. Do you see how that is one big way of loving yourself? Comedian Michael Jr. says it this way: most people don't have trouble giving, they have trouble receiving. Loving yourself with great value is choosing to receive what others offer to you. The reciprocal effect of receiving love from others is wanting to love others the way you've been loved. See, when the jewelry clerk gave me the discount and the gourmet chocolates and sparkling cider, I didn't keep them for myself. I didn't go home, turn on a movie, and gorge on chocolates and guzzle down the cider. I took what was given to me on that night I proposed to Shammy so I could share those blessings with her. This is what we need to do when we love ourselves with great value. We need to share that love with others. But actually, more on that next week. So now take some time in your life group and discuss how you currently are successful at, or maybe struggling with, loving yourself with great value. I pray today you will recover this lost art and find the incredible benefits it brings to you, your relationships with others, and your relationship with God. Now enjoy this week's study with your life group.